What if I told you that some of the world's most breathtaking temples were actually carved sex manuals, except, life-sized and in 3D? Yep. While your high school history teacher was busy making you memorize boring dates about empires, India was building stone cathedrals, where the Kama Sutra wasn't just a book. It was practically the building code. And here's the kicker. These temples weren't hidden away in some sleazy back alley. They were massive, government-approved, spiritually sanctioned sex parks that doubled as places of worship. God and grind, all under one roof. Now, why does this matter? Because history tends to pretend that sex is something modern people invented last Tuesday. But the ancient world was way ahead of us in combining spirituality with sexuality, sometimes in ways so graphic that even modern censors blush. These temples are proof that the past wasn't prudish. If anything, it was hornier than an HBO writer's room. So buckle up, because today we're going to explore the scandalous, sacred, and very sweaty world of India's secret orgy temples. If you're new here, subscribe, because trust me, you'll need therapy after this history lesson, and I plan to provide it weekly. Let's get right into it. Number 1. The Temple Kama Sutra. Imagine walking into church and finding the walls covered in porn, but like tasteful porn, with perfect lighting and everyone holding yoga poses you couldn't pull off even if your chiropractor bribed you. That's basically what you'd see at Khajuraho, the most famous of these Indian temple complexes. Built around 1,000 years ago, they're covered in carvings that make 50 Shades look like a coloring book. We're talking threesomes, orgies, and even a few positions that look less like sex and more like Olympic gymnastics. And the best part? These carvings weren't tucked away in some hidden chamber. They were front and center, as if the architects wanted to remind worshippers, hey, God made your body. Don't waste it on just standing still, but it wasn't just about titillation. These carvings were symbolic, mixing Hindu philosophy with the Kama Sutra's idea that pleasure is a pathway to the divine. Basically, sex wasn't dirty. It was a spiritual Wi-Fi signal to the gods. Meanwhile, in Europe, at the same time, monks were debating whether women even had souls. So yeah, next time someone says the Middle Ages were boring, just remind them that India had literal temples of tantric porn carved in stone. That'll shut them up. Number 2. Rituals of divine sweat. Okay, so here's where it gets weirder. These weren't just stone art museums. Some temples were reportedly used for actual sex rituals. Yes, real live ceremonies that involved priests, devotees, and sometimes whole groups of worshippers. Picture Sunday Mass, except instead of communion wine, you're sharing bodily fluids in the name of cosmic balance. Tantric practices taught that sexual energy could be harnessed to connect with the universe, so couples would gather inside temple courtyards, guided by priests who were basically the sex coaches of their day. The idea was that by syncing your body's rhythms, you'd sync with the cosmos itself. Stars, planets, orgasms, everything aligned like a cosmic Spotify playlist. Of course, these rituals weren't for everyone. They were secret, restricted to initiates, and often wrapped up in layers of symbolism. Outsiders might just see sweaty chaos, but insiders believed they were participating in sacred acts of creation. It was messy, but meaningful. And let's be honest, compared to modern dating apps, the system probably made more sense. At least you knew everyone was there for the same spiritual purpose, instead of pretending to be looking for something serious while just ghosting people. Number 3. Bestiality in stone. Before you think these temples were all about romance and roses, nope. Some of the carvings take a dive into territory that would make even the weirdest corners of the internet squirm. I'm talking about depictions of humans having sex with animals, horses, elephants, even mythical beasts. It's all there, immortalized in sandstone. Now why? Was ancient India just one giant furry convention? Not exactly. Historians say these images were symbolic, showing the merging of primal instincts with divine consciousness. Basically, sex wasn't just sex. it was a metaphor for dissolving boundaries, human, animal, God, all part of the same universal soup. Of course, when you strip away the philosophy, what you're left with is a horse getting way too involved in temple life. And that's the kind of thing that makes modern tourists walk up, take one look, and say, "Ah, yes, very spiritual." While trying not to laugh or cry, it's a reminder that sacred art doesn't always match modern morality. Back then, these carvings were cosmic metaphors. Today, they'd get your deviant art account banned. Number 4. Virgins for the gods. Here's a fun nightmare. What if your daughter's future was decided not by a marriage, but by a temple? Enter the Devadasi system, where girls were married to deities and became temple servants. On paper, they were brides of the gods. In reality, many ended up performing rituals that blurred the line between sacred duty and sexual exploitation. These temple women often danced, sang, and sometimes participated in tantric rites that included sex with priests or wealthy patrons. The idea was that their bodies were offerings, gateways to divine blessing. Society simultaneously worshipped them and shunned them, because nothing says holy hypocrisy like using someone for spiritual sex work and then pretending they're cursed. Over time, this practice spiraled into outright abuse, with Devadasis trapped in cycles of exploitation under the guise of religion. It's one of those dark stains on history that people try to sweep under the rug, but the evidence is carved into the walls and etched into ancient records. So while the temples stood as monuments to divine pleasure, they also remind us how quickly sacred can slide into scandalous. Basically, the gods got their brides, but the girls got the short end of the sacred stick. Number 5. The cosmic orgy. Picture this: an entire temple courtyard filled with bodies moving in unison. Not for war, not for a festival, but for one big, sweaty, cosmic-themed sex party. Sounds like something out of a cult documentary, right? But in tantric traditions, large-scale group rituals weren't just about physical indulgence. They symbolized the merging of countless souls into the universal divine. The logic was simple and wild. If one couple's union can echo creation, imagine what happens when dozens of couples join in at once. It was like cranking the spiritual amplifier to 11. Participants believed they weren't just doing it for fun. They were reenacting the birth of the universe itself. Every gasp and moan, a cosmic drum beat. Every climax, a miniature Big Bang. And while outsiders might have seen chaos, insiders saw choreography. Ritual leaders guided the flow like conductors, making sure the act matched the phases of the moon, planetary alignments, and cycles of fertility. Forget horoscopes telling you you'll meet a tall stranger. These guys scheduled their orgies by astrology. So yeah, the next time someone tells you about team-building exercises, remember, ancient India had a version too, but their trust falls ended with a lot less clothing. Number 6. Foreigners lose their minds. Now imagine being a stiff Victorian traveler used to churches where the raciest thing you'll see is Jesus exposed ribs, and suddenly walking into Khajuraho or Konark temple. What do you find? Wall-to-wall orgies, gods in positions your yoga instructor wouldn't dare demonstrate, and animal-human mashups that look like they escaped from a nightmare. The British colonials, who prided themselves on prudish morals, nearly fainted. Some described the temples as abominations, while others secretly took notes, because, let's be honest, repression and curiosity go hand in hand. Victorian archaeologists tried to categorize the carvings as obscene anomalies, assuming they were mistakes or later additions. Spoiler, they weren't. In fact, when the British rediscovered these temples in the 19th century, they debated whether to destroy them or just hide them from public view. They couldn't handle the idea that Indian spirituality could be so graphic, and yet, ironically, their attempts to shame the temples only made them more famous. Tourists flocked to see the dirty temples, and suddenly, sacred architecture turned into a scandalous tourist attraction. Basically, the British walked into ancient India's sex ed class and left clutching their pearls, forever scarred. The temples survived. The British Empire? Not so much. Number 7. The Wheel of Lust. If you think a calendar app is complicated, imagine one carved into a temple wall. Except instead of reminders for dentist appointments, it's packed with erotic symbolism. At the Sun Temple in Konark, the massive stone wheel isn't just a clock, it's a cosmological diagram where time, the sun, and yes, sexual imagery all spin together. The outer walls of the temple are covered with erotic carvings, placed right alongside celestial symbols. To the ancients, sex wasn't a guilty hobby. It was literally the rhythm of the universe. The wheel represented cosmic order, while the naked bodies entwined around it reminded worshippers that creation itself was an ongoing act. Basically, time and sex were inseparable. Every sunrise was just another cosmic round of Netflix and chill. Visitors today are left scratching their heads. Was this a sundial? A cosmic sex calendar? The answer is both. Imagine checking your watch to see, it's 3 p.m., perfect time for a quick ritual orgy. Practical? Maybe not. Poetic? Absolutely. So if you ever feel like time is running out, just remember, in Konark, time was literally measured in orgasms. Now that's motivation not to waste your day. Number 8. Sex as salvation. Here's where the philosophy takes a sharp, sweaty turn. In Tantric teachings, sex wasn't just pleasure or procreation, it was liberation. The ultimate cheat code to escaping the cycle of birth and rebirth was through merging physically and spiritually with your partner. In other words, your orgasm was your enlightenment. The logic went like this. In the act of sex, you lose your ego, your boundaries blur, and for a brief moment, you're dissolved into something greater. That moment, according to Tantra, was a glimpse of moksha, freedom from the endless hamster wheel of reincarnation. Forget fasting, meditation, or renouncing worldly goods. Some sects believed that enlightenment was best reached between the sheets, or on temple, stone, if you were really committed. Of course, this idea wasn't universally accepted. Other Hindu and Buddhist traditions side-eyed Tantra like it was the weird cousin at family dinner. Still, the fact that entire temples were devoted to the practice shows just how seriously it was taken. So yeah, while the rest of the world was trying to pray or starve their way into heaven, some Indians were basically saying, why suffer when salvation can feel this good? Honestly, can't argue with the logic. Number 9. The temple gymnastics. If you've ever looked at a Kama Sutra diagram and thought, no way a human spine bends like that, the temple carvings are here to prove you wrong. The walls at Khajuraho and Konark don't just show missionary and doggy. They show entire acrobatic routines that make Cirque du Soleil look tame. Bodies are twisted into pretzels, stacked like Jenga towers, and balanced on things that definitely weren't meant to be balanced on. Some carvings show 5 or 6 participants in a single arrangement, with limbs interwoven so tightly you'd need a map to figure out who belongs where. Scholars call it symbolism. Tourists call it porn yoga. And the best part? These poses were carved with such precision that modern yoga instructors have actually studied them as evidence of ancient flexibility practices. So yes, your sweaty downward dog might actually be a watered-down version of a 1,000-year-old orgy pose. Namaste, indeed. Basically, these temples were the world's first CrossFit studios, except instead of burpees, you were just trying not to pull a hamstring during a ritual threesome. Number 10. Censorship and survival. Here's the twist. Despite their sacred purpose, many of these temples almost didn't survive history. Over the centuries, waves of invading powers and religious reformers tried to wipe out the erotic imagery. Some smashed carvings, others plastered them over, and later colonial officials labeled them indecent and restricted access. But stone is stubborn, and desire is harder to kill than armies. Even when rulers tried to erase the sexual symbolism, fragments survived, enough to remind future generations that these places once thrummed with tantric energy. By the time archaeologists started documenting them in the 19th and 20th centuries, they found ruins scarred with censorship attempts, but still defiantly erotic. Today, UNESCO protects Khajuraho as a World Heritage Site, and tourists flock not just for the architecture, but for the sheer audacity of it all. What was once hidden, shamed, and suppressed now sits out in the open, drawing millions of gawking visitors every year. So yeah, history tried to cancel the temples, but the temples clapped back, proving once and for all, you can't censor desire carved into stone. Number 11. The forgotten lesson. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, for starters, the orgy temples prove that the ancients weren't the buttoned-up prudes many people imagine. They didn't separate sex and spirituality the way later societies did. For them, the body was divine, and pleasure wasn't something to be hidden in the dark. It was literally worshipped in the light of day. But the darker side of this story is just as important. For every cosmic orgy carved in stone, there were real people, like the Devadasis, whose lives were tangled in exploitation, proof that humans have always had a knack for turning the sacred into the scandalous. These temples are both awe-inspiring and unsettling, a reminder that history is never simple. And honestly, if history teaches us anything, it's that power makes people do really gross, weird, and fascinating things. We like to think the modern world is so different, but scroll through the news, or worse, your neighbor's internet search history, and tell me we've really evolved. Spoiler, we haven't. So next time you see a temple, a church, or a mosque, just remember, behind every holy site, there might be a history of sweat, scandal, and a whole lot of awkward stone carvings. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.